Republic City, Altair decided, as he easily leapt between buildings, far between the notice of the obvious civilians below, was definitely on his list of least liked, albeit most interesting cities. It was cleaner than any of his usual destinations, sure, but it was far louder, more chaotic, and far too colorful for his liking. It didn't help that he could barely speak their language, let alone read it. Plus his clothes, still a bright white despite the amount of dust, sweat, and blood they've come in contact with over the years, kept bringing unwanted attention his way like he cared. His task was simple enough: track down the leader of the radical group known as the Equalists and eliminate him. He had not been given much information to go on. All he had been told was the Equalists were common knowledge, yet they did not always work out in the open, and that many of the people that inhabited Republic City had strange abilities unlike any he had ever seen. Beyond that, he was left to his own devices but gathering the information he needed was overwhelmingly easy. All he had to do was listen to a few conversations. No real change from the norm there, and he found out everything he needed in a matter of hours, despite the annoying bit of a language barrier. First off, the Equalist leader went by the name Amon, although it was unknown whether or not it was an alias. Second, a threat had been sent out across the city via one of the radio things, saying that unless the pro-benders, bending, whatever that was, Altair never bothered to learn about the little nuisance of the culture in Republic City. But from what he had gathered, it was some kind of tournament like sports. Finals were cancelled when Amon would launch an attack on some of the part of the city. Thirdly, based on what he had learned from eavesdropping on a conversation between two of the metal-clad guards, there were no plans on canceling pro-bending, whatever it was. And lastly, the pro-bending thing he didn't really care about would be held in a giant golden building right on the bay. There was one thing he couldn't quite understand, however, and that was what these Equalists had to do with the Templars. Probably nothing, but perhaps everything, no matter how much he wanted to ask. Altair held his tongue for once, knowing from experience that he would most likely learn the answer anyway, either with time or by his own means. But that would have to come later. In the meantime, he had a job to do. Though he never would admit it, Altair was impressed when he began to approach the stadium a few hours before nightfall. The metal-clad guards were everywhere, at all the entrances and exits, on warships rolled steadily through the bay, and on the flying contraptions that had circled in the skies overhead. And though they were not yet letting spectators into the large golden building, it was almost laughably easy to slip inside undetected. A few coins tossed into a group of scruffy-looking children was all that was necessary to provide the few seconds of distractions he needed to walk right through the front door. After that, it was simply a matter of finding a suitable vantage point from which he could see everything that could be happening in a few hours' time. He had only began scaling the side of a wide open space. That was the main room of the stadium, when a few snatches of conversations caught his attention. Security sweep going? Altair glanced downward to see two people, a man in flowing yellow and orange robes, and a woman dressed in the same metal uniform as the guards, standing in a doorway about 30 feet below him. Fine, the woman replied sternly. Altair couldn't see either of their faces from the angle he was at, but he could easily guess that the woman did not want to talk to the brightly dressed man at the moment. They've checked underneath the stadium. The man was rocking on his heels. Without seemingly to realize it, Altair was secretly glad they were not using words he knew for the most part. Yes, the woman replied, with an irritated edge in her voice. And do you have enough officers to cover all the points of entry? The woman gave an exasperated sigh. I have the skies, the bays, and every nook and cranny of this place covered. Now leave me alone and let me do my job. Had Altair not been in the middle of a mission, he might have laughed at the woman's statement. If she really had every bit of the place under watch, and he would have actually had to try not to be discovered. Such incompetence. A name. Not a very important one, but still. With so much on the line, it would be nice if we could help each other out, at least for one night. And from there, whether or not his bright white attire would draw attention. After all, these people never think to look up. So, this is pro-bending, Altair thought as he watched from the shadowy perch in the rifts. Just above the highest row of stand, the spectacle before him, or below him rather, was undeniably awe-inspiring. To think there was people capable of such feats as being able to command water, shift earth without touching it. He was less impressed with the fire wielder, as he knew it was possible to conjure fire and to even exhale a plum of flames given the right circumstances. Though he had not yet figured out how it was done in this case, what he had figured out by then, that there were 3 combatants in the gray uniforms who were not playing by the rules. Judging by the cries of outrage from the audience, the voice from everywhere and nowhere that was narrating every move using a lot of strange slang phrases that made absolutely no sense to Altair, and the orange and red and orange clad opposing team. The Greys and Altair dubbed them in his head were ruthless in their attacks, but they worked together seemingly. All were with a clear goal in mind, all with the same regard for fairness. The Reds, for lack of better sayings to call them, were stubborn, absolutely refusing to give in. The listening to each other's movements in a way that only came with trust. The water wielder among them, the one with the ponytail, was exceptionally powerful in the ways she moved. It wasn't enough, apparently, as the Greys swiftly brought the first round to a close by knocking the Reds right off the platform. And the Reds would have lost right there if it was not for the water wielding luckily grounding to the edge. Despite their near loss in the first round, the Reds only seemed more confident in round 2. So much so, in fact, that the round ended in an apparent tie between neither sides able to shake the other. At a wave from the official, both teams stepped forward, the red water wielder taking another step towards her opponent, and the gray water wielder follow suit. The tiebreaker was over before it really began. The water wielder launched the first shot, sending a blast of water curving around her opponent's head, forcing him to dodge. While he was distracted, she kicked her left leg, sending a blast up to the opponent's face, ripping off his protective mask, throwing him off the razor portion of the platform. In a one fluid motion, Altair felt one corner of his lips curl a smoke. He liked that woman's style. The third round began shortly after and ended almost as quickly. The Greys were quick to escalate their cheating to exponential levels and swiftly threw the red team over the edge as a result. The crowd roared in an even mix of triumph and outrage as the Grey team were proclaimed the victors for what was apparently the 4th time. It was a short-lived victory, unfortunately. It seemed that Altair was the only one who saw it coming. His eyes narrowed as people who had, up until that moment, seemed like ordinary audience members, were suddenly hollowed in a bright scarlet that only he could see as they began to move towards the guards. Spikes of bright energy on their hands, a pair of them, were moving towards the 2 people Altair had overheard a few hours prior. Altair jumped. He actually jumped in surprise. But the 2 people dropped like stones, their bodies lit up briefly, as if struck by lightning, and more of them were falling all over the place. Should he act? He wondered. No, he decided not yet. The masked people with lightning in their hands did not seem to be killing people, which meant they were there to scare and contain crowd control. His head snapped into the directions of the playing field when the center ring opened to allow for a platform to rise out of the floor, revealing 7 people, all of them masked, and one of them wore a bone-white mask. Amon. The 3 Greys had very stupidly not yet taken the opportunity to leave, and even more stupidly were trying to out all sayings attack the 7 Equalists. Not even 30 seconds had gone when all 3 Greys were either on the floor tied up or being held before the man in the white mask. The entire audience cringed as the air-shattering screams that came first. The gray-clad white water wielder, then from his 2 companions, as they were each brought before Amon. All 3 men were limp and unresponsive as they were thrown over the edge and into the water. Whatever Amon had done to them it didn't look pleasant, though the fact that they did not seem to be any surface wound was some comfort. Then, one of the Equalists handed Amon a silver saying, a shiny silver saying that made voices loud and came from all directions at once, and Amon spoke. I believe I have your attention. Benders of Republic City. Ah, that voice. Yes, that voice was his target. Altair had heard that voice over the radio, saying enough times over the past few days to recognize it whenever the way the air around the masked man glinted gold in his vision over confirmed it. Once again, the wolf bats are your pro-bending champions. Although the Greys were really called the wolf rats, whatever. It seems fitting that your celebrity free bullies who cheated their way to victory, because today, every day you threaten and abuse your fellow non-bender citizen, just like the Wolfbats did to their opponents tonight. Amon had the audience riveted with terror and awe, so much so that no one noticed Altair drop down from his hiding place to stand amongst the crowd. How convenient. Those men were supposed to be the best in the bending world, and yet it only took me a few moments to cleanse them of their impurity, and so that was what happened. Let this be a warning to all of you benders out there. If you stand in my way, you will meet the same fate. Collective gasps of fear from the audience was enough to mask the choking gasp of one of the Equalists as Altair slit his throat from behind as he slowly made his way through the stand. Now, to my followers, for years the Equalists have been forced to hide in the shadows, but now we have the numbers and we have the strength to recreate a new Republic City. I'm happy to tell you that the time for change has finally come very soon. The current tyrannic Benders regime will be replaced with a fair-minded Equalist government, and your children will no longer have to fear a reason to be afraid. Altair was almost all the way down to the front row. It is time to take our city back. For centuries, bending have possessed an unnatural advantage over ordinary people, but thankfully, modern technology has provided us with ways to even out the playing field. Now anyone can hold the power of chi blockers. Now there was a word that Altair did not know. In their hands. My followers will not rest until the city achieves equality! Altair did not want to hear anymore. He began to run down the last few steps, prepared to jump, and once this goal is achieved, a flick of his wrist brought out his hidden blade. We will equalize the rest of the world! He pushed off the barrier at the edge and gasped between the stands and the platform, launching himself into the air with strength far beyond that of a normal man, blade poised to strike. The revolution has There was a dull thud, accompanied by a nasty creak as Altair struck from above, letting the movement from his jump drive his hidden blade into the masked man's exposed throat. With a free hand, he retrieved a white feather from his belt, withdrew the now blood-covered blade from the neck of the target, swiping it across the gushing. Be at peace, Altair murmured. As was routine, the man bled out in a matter of minutes. It was possible that he tried to protest or give just notification for his actions, just as they always did. But with the mask, Altair could not tell. Work is finished. He got to his feet and stepped away from the still foremost Equalist leader. It was only then that people began to realize what happened. 6 Equalists just had there as guards stood there, approached stunned. Again, it was hard to tell as they all wore masks. But after a few seconds, one of them charged forward, brandishing one of those lightning-wrapped gloves. Altair's lip curled in a sneer. Too slow. A single swipe from his blade, as it was unsheathed, was enough to fell his attacker, and he didn't give the other 5 a chance to do the same. As he sprinted to the edge of the platform, and not before the Equalist's body even hit the floor, with a running leap, he was back in the stands and heaped up the stairs once more, determined to find a place to disappear until things had calmed down enough for him to return to home. No one in Republic City truly knew exactly what happened that day at the arena. Thousands of eyewitnesses reporting white something swooping in from above, striking Amon down mid-sentence before vanishing 5 frames. Some claimed it was a man out for revenge. Others insisted that it was a spirit that Amon had angered somehow in the past. A few were questionable sanity, even suggested that it was Councilman Tenzin. After all, surely only an airbender could move like that. This theory was swift debunked, however, as Councilman Tenzin had still been suffering from effects of being struck down by an electrified glove at the time of the white being's materialization. No one did anything. Not once did anyone even think assassin. It was ensured chaos. The ports were closed down for several days, but the following week, a small ship set sail for one outlying islands of the Earth Kingdom. Among its passengers was a silent, unassuming man with a golden eye, a scar across his lip, and a sword at his hip. Nothing is true, so everything is